Welcome to the BPM 360 podcast. I'm Russell.
And I'm Caspar. And together we will help you navigate the treacherous waters of the BPM adoption journey. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Russell, good morning, my friend. How are you today?
Good morning, Caspar. I'm fine, and I'm really thrilled that we're kicking off our season 2.
Oh, yeah.
And season 2 is all the lessons learned of season 1. What we want to do better
But
and
that's going to be
different.
a challenge. So we need help for that, you mean?
Absolutely. We realize that just the two people mansplaining BPM is not enough. We need support. So this idea, and I'm really thrilled that today we're kicking off this season 2 by inviting somebody who's just as deep into this topic as we are, and I really hope that say from some of the fundamentals that we covered in season 1, we'll be looking at some more practical aspects, but taking it from a different angle. Because ultimately BPM 360 covering every angle, that was the idea. And in order to dissect, say, the basics that we covered in season 1, I really think that you need to take it up from different angles with different people, because everybody has their own view and limitation, and only in debate can you actually get down to the real fundamental and truths of things. Yeah.
Cool. So without further ado, Michael, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm really excited. I've done a lot of podcasts, but I'm really excited to talk to you guys as BPM experts, because I know we're going to have some rich questions and rich conversation.
Yeah. So just for the audience, when I say Michael, welcome, it's Michael Schank, the esteemed author of a book called Digital Transformation Success, plus a very elaborate subtitle that I'm going to keep as a spoiler when you read and buy the book. But let's dive into that. And first of all, Michael, the audience knows me and Russell by now. Yep. Who are you? Where do you come from? And how did you end up here?
Yeah. So I spent most of my career in consulting. So started my career at Accenture, 13 years there, but I was a deep technologist, Java, C++ programmer. I was a solution architect. I led large development projects. Went to Bank of America for a little bit under 2 years, still in a technology role. Mm-hmm. Then I joined Ernst & Young, where I spent 10 years there. But one of my first projects was creating a business capability model for a large bank. So at that time, they didn't have a large technology practice. So being a technologist, I really didn't know what the business did. I was focused on, is my code working? Did I deliver it on time? Is it defect free? All that good stuff, right? So one of my first projects was at a large bank. They wanted us to create a business capability model. So we interviewed a few people in the business and we created it. And I just had this epiphany moment. I'm like, wow, like you get to understand everything the business does on one sheet of paper, and then, a couple levels deeper. So at that point, I dedicated the rest of my time at EY to that, branded myself at first a business architect, and then started looking for different opportunities to leverage this concept. I quickly realized that capabilities aren't enough, and that you do have to go to process of how things actually work and all the resources and all the details in there. So I built the first U.S. Financial Services Office process excellence group, and then just continued to develop this methodology, testing it in different transformation scenarios, et cetera. And it worked every time. I was like, wow. So I look at this as, my career, I've been in a lot of transformation scenarios, and you're always fighting the battle of chaos. And I'm sure we all have our horror stories of transformation strategies that aren't clear, teams that really don't know what they're doing, plans that don't make sense, executives that get fired. And this just seems like the antidote to all that chaos. So I left EY, I went to Citibank for 2 years. I was head of process excellence for the US retail bank. But I started thinking about this book before I even left EY. I left Citi in March of last year to write the book, because I just feel so passionate that this is a solution to a big problem in our industry. So I wrote the book and published it in December of last year, and have been promoting it and building a consulting and training business since then.
Cool. Well, it's absolutely great to have you on the show, and to kick off our second season, where we are going to talk to a lot of interesting people. So let's get this show on the road.
Yes, and I must say in that short introduction, you strung so many chords and topics. So I think, oh, that's it, business architecture. And then coming from IT, I find it interesting when you're looking for people that are on the same level of discussing process management. It is astonishing how, when customers ask me, who should we pull in to help us modeling, building up the business architecture. And you do answer yes, but they've got to be really related to the business. But on the other hand, how often do you find some real people that actually have their IT background, and from that they have a good idea of abstract like principles that you need to apply to the actual business case. And if you get these people there, they really are good because they understand let's say the inventory idea or the modeling idea.
Yep.
But then they dig into the actual business requirements. So you get these people, and the other way around, sometimes it's tricky. But I don't want to get too much in the prejudices here. But I've always said, don't neglect the IT people that are gems because they really are interested and passionate about the business. And they have this fundamental understanding of, let's say, objects and models, and they can bring this in to bring an abstract form of the actual business architecture rather than saying this is how you sell, this is how you buy. It says now we need something more, generalizable in our inventory to be able to work with this as a substance. So I really like the way, with your background and the way you've evolved in this direction, that really strung a lot of chords about, the people and also our path on this journey, how we got to do what we're doing now.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. Architects know how to kind of break down a situation or an environment, kind of look at where there's overlaps, redundancies, et cetera, and then find a way to kind of eliminate those. The one thing I kind of don't use the term business architecture anymore. And if you guys know the BA Guild, the BizBach, even TOGAF and some of that stuff, they stop at capability model, and I don't think that's low enough. So a business capability is abstract concept, but you need something to tie it to the tangible world. And if you don't tie it to business process, then you're not really kind of getting a true understanding of how the environment works, and you're not going to be able to do the analysis that you need.
But isn't that just a second, Russell? Isn't that? I mean, I have that conversation with enterprise architects all week long almost nowadays. And for me, when they go down to that business capability, it almost, I would say, translates one-on-one into your process architecture. It's virtually the same thing. It's just sometimes slightly different named, but from the process side, you can go deeper into details than you can at the enterprise architecture side. And actually, I think that you shouldn't go into that much detail on the architecture side, at least on the BA side.
You mean from the capability side?
Yeah, from the capability side. I mean, that's fine enough.
That's why as you brought that capability topic, I said, we can have a good discussion about this because I totally agree with you that the coming from the strategy, what you want to achieve, or what does your business have to be able to do. This view on basis capability, I think it's helpful to understand more in a holistic view on what you need to have established in your organization as capabilities to be able to then fulfill certain, let's say, business model. But when it comes to doing that, defining the actual how, I think the process is much more also capable in itself from a methodology to tie up all the little details of who is doing something with which system, what related risks are assigned to it. So this is where the process as a centerpiece of transformation, I think, has a much deeper, provides a deeper insight into all these aspects. You also So here I like this idea of the business capability model as like an overarching with the strategy. But a lot of the business capability discussions around the IT business architecture is too low. Yeah, it drops down to a level where you said, I need to cluster my applications according to capabilities. But actually, it's nearly on a functional level. And then it's like, where is, as Caspar, as you're saying, isn't that actually the process you're talking about rather than a capability, or even lower, a function of the application to support a process and not the other way around? Yeah. And that's where I think if you can resolve this in a discussion to say we agree to agree upon my view of things, not to disagree, but we need to get together here. But for the use cases, you use it in this form. And for our use case of business transformation, we use it in this form. I think there's a lot of confusion around there. And especially for people that are looking from the outside and say, guys, get your act together.
Yeah.
Agree upon how you want to proceed and how you want to interpret it or move forward. And then I think we're very near together. That's the point,
I think so too.
That's always so disruptive about these discussions sometimes. But Michael, the way you took into this discussion, totally love it. And I think that is really, and I think that's something your book revolves around, is that again and again, you come back to the business process as a key, let's say, nucleus around a successful transformation. And taking your audience, maybe looking from, I understood, that was one of the big questions you had. So how did you manage to get this book done? So you took your time, you went off work, and you didn't just do it in the weekends, but you really dedicated your heart and soul and time into getting this book done. But let's just maybe just tell us, who do you think this book is best for? And based on that, let's maybe dig into the structure of the book, just to see how, what people can expect when they get into it. And they
Absolutely. And I do want to hit that capability process. Maybe we could hit a little bit. But so my book is, and I think I've outlined like 7 or 8 personas that the book is for. First and foremost, it's for transformation leaders. So the book is called Digital Transformation Success. A transformation, obviously you guys know this, but is a large and complex endeavor that's probably tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, multi-year. You have to keep a lot of different practitioner types, like your business, your IT, your risk, your data. You have to keep all of those groups aligned to what your complex goal of what you're transforming the organization is. So first and foremost, if I really believe that this is the solution to transformation challenges. So it's tailored to them so they're not going to implement the frameworks, but they need to know that there's a better way to do it so that they can invest their time and their resources into building a process capability. Some other groups are people that lead process center of excellence. So understanding, what you have to create from a modeling perspective. A lot of what I believe a process center of excellence needs to do is define your standards and then governing these assets because, and we'll get into process inventory, but organizations change all the time, and you've got to refresh this information so that it's always accurate and up to date and reflects what the business does. And then there's process modelers, obviously, because I talk about how to do process inventory and BPMN and tie it to capability models and metadata and all this other good stuff. But then there's personas aligned to each of the use cases, which we could get into. So how do you use this to drive a clear understanding of your strategy to the impacts? How do you use this for better risk management? How do you use this for being more efficient in the change process, all the way from the strategy to funding your programs, all the way through scoping, requirements, et cetera? This becomes a common language to drive that process. Operational excellence. So looking at the environment from not only a process level, but a 30,000-foot view level of where is there waste and inefficiencies, kind of in the Lean Six Sigma kind of principles perspective that I could eliminate. And then enterprise architecture. So how can I use more detailed and richer information about what the business does to create an IT architecture that more aligns to what they want, and that is agile in the face of future uncertainty? So I think this is the basis for virtually all of those things. So putting all those things through one single lens of what the business does is the key to alignment and the key to transformation success.
So that's a very interesting rundown, Michael. The thing that it triggers with me, and that it's something that I run into also on a frequent basis, is that when you talk about BPM, you very often talk about a combination between it is either for running business or it's done for a project.
Yep.
And in reality, it needs to serve both.
Yes.
And so if I can pick your brain on that, how do you see that interaction between the fact that it needs to be running business on one hand and it needs to be project supporting on the other hand, knowing that you typically need to share the resources because you only have one center of excellence typically, if you have the luxury of having one. How do you see that being in your experience being done throughout your customers that you've worked with?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. In fact, I have one kind of customer I'm working with that is kind of merged the two concepts, which means that you're not getting the models that you need because you're very much influenced by the use case.
Hmm.
So I think as you lay out your process strategy, when you start your center of excellence or your process capability, you need to lay out some guiding principles. I think a couple of them are, these models that you're creating have to be comprehensive and accurate. They have to be owned by the business, but you're just a facilitator of creating it.
Hmm.
And you've got to separate the concerns of creating, what you're doing is you're creating a model of what the business does. You've got to separate that from your uses so that you could have more than one use case
Yeah.
across. So a center of excellence can obviously have modelers. Then you'll have consultants that design some of these methodologies for how you use it.
Hmm.
But you've got to stick with the guiding principle of you're creating a model of what the business does, and that has to be accurate and complete.
Okay.
Yeah, and when I think about a lot of these, like, and especially when you're talking about inventory, you're talking about the hierarchy and a structure based on the, let's say, the core business.
Yep.
So, and here, when you dig into the details, you will have differences between the as is, and then you start designing like to be states, where there
Yes.
will be maybe some difference on a even functional level, application level
Mhm.
that is being used, or you have certain shifts in the organization on who is doing it. But first and foremost, I see that in a lot of business model changes, you extend your business model by introducing new business scenarios, so end-to-end scenarios, but again, you're reusing your inventory to think about new constellations of providing services or providing products to your customers. And here you have this effect that you've tried to use the as is processes as best as possible, and you identify the gaps where you really have something to add to the inventory. Yeah, if it's something you haven't done before, you see we really are here. We do not have an as is. We need to define a complete new to be, but there will always be this evolving of the actual view on the business based on an inventory. So I think it can grow. So ultimately, from a framework perspective, a process is a process, and it is defined in a state of this is how we do it now, and in the context of a use case or a project, maybe even like a risk assessment and a mitigation of a certain issue. We have to change it, and then you define the future state, and you have to get into a cycle. And here, I think the super important thing is how do you, over the use cases, establish more or less one ownership and a clear understanding of the responsibilities for you facilitate it, but
Yep.
who are you facilitating it with? And here you have a lot of the times the clashes where the risk and compliance people see it as their ownership on certain artifacts, and people then say the business is then it's the owner, but on the other hand there is a lot of topics that have to be driven by IT. So I think from a facilitation perspective, getting the documents together is one thing, but getting the ownership
Yep.
aligned and understood across these different use cases, that's the super challenge. And that's why I think, Caspar, your point
Love it.
comes in where you're saying,
Yeah.
yeah, but how do you manage to get you've got to run business with it. So there's an own responsibility around that. And you need to drive change. And how do you get these people to talk together? Yeah.
Yep. So there's a great question, Russell. There's a couple things in there and maybe I'll take it back to the capability and process intersection because I
Oh,
do
Yes,
think this is
please.
an important point. So when I think about those two concepts, I look at the difference between the dictionary and the thesaurus. So what is process inventory? And it's probably good to explain to your audience. Process inventory is inventorying every single process your organization does. So how do you do that? You anchor to something that's complete, which is your organizational hierarchy. So the way you construct it is it's an interview process. You start at the top of the hierarchy and you ask a simple question. What is it
Mhm.
that you do? And then you take those responses and you turn them into verb, noun, process names. But you ask their teams what they do, and you ask their teams what they do until you get to a level you feel like you've got all the processes captured. I'm big on now to validate that it's accurate and complete, make sure that there's no disagreements. I do formal attestations, capture email or some other electronic format that says, yes, I agree that this is an accurate and complete representation of my processes. I do that bottom up. So do you agree that this
Mhm.
is accurate? Do you agree? Do you agree? Now I have every process is detailed for that organization. Now that is your dictionary because it defines every single process. I give a definition for it. I give a name of an owner for it, not just on improving the process, but day-to-day operations. But since it's a hierarchy of processes, it's a hierarchy of ownership. So you don't just own your process. Your boss has some level of ownership. So does their boss. So you have kind of the whole structure. That's the dictionary side. The thesaurus, capability models are by definition abstract and non-redundant. So if I could map each process to a capability, now I could see overlaps across different businesses. Now, when I was at Citi, the U.S. retail bank, for just to use an example, I can open an account in the retail bank. I can open a credit card account in two different businesses. I can open a mortgage account. I could open a wealth account. I can open a bunch of accounts. Now, those are all, if I have a capability model that my process or I can map each of those processes to an account opening capability. Now I could look across and say, if I want to standardize that account opening, if I want to maybe do a shared service or I want to outsource it, whatever I want to do, now I could see where all those live. I could see the owners, and now I could do a deep dive in what's the different technology, what's the different people, what's the different risk profile, whatever it may be. So that's, I just wanted to explain those differences. In terms of Russell, where you're going with the future state, current state, let's just pick on maybe a scenario of post-merger integration. So you have company A and they have a set of processes, and you have company B and they have a set of processes. And there's probably some overlap and there's probably some non-overlap. If you were to do a full process inventory on both, and now I could say, okay, so what is my future state process inventory look like? And I could start choosing which of the people, technology, what are the resources that I want to pull together to design this? I could create a future state process inventory that lays out roles and responsibility, who does what. And now I have very specific details about the impacts of that. So from an ownership perspective, current state is more just understanding what each of the businesses do themselves and defining that ownership. For something like a post-merger integration, you assign some level, somebody who's an architect or a program manager, business owner, product owner, whatever you want to call it, on that project, and they're designing the future state, and they're getting all the resources aligned in that effort to building that future state to the vision that's laid out in the process inventory. Does that make sense? I know I covered a lot of ground there.
It does make sense. Given that we're shooting a live recording, I do need to step out to let my daughter in because my wife closed the door on her. So, but keep talking. I mean, I like this as a charm of doing live podcasting. I'll be back in just a second, but just keep talking, please.
I told my son, do not disturb me, and I just got a message that he wants screen time to play ball stars.
I got a sign on the front door that says I'm recording, so please come in, but be patient. But my wife went out the door and she closed the doors. But anyway, I'll be back in a second, but just keep talking, please.
Okay. So that's good. Caspar's not there. He's not. I can get rid of my questions. No, seriously. What I do very much agree with this idea of the inventory. When I read the book, I was got a bit caught on this you go through the organization, it derives from the organization. Now, on the other hand, you do say, and this is where I think that if your organization in a big enterprise, it depends. You have the headquarter, then you have the subsidiaries. They all have like their own variants of certain processes. So generally, the approach to gather top down the process inventory, I completely agree. But the real, let's say, challenge is to get it to on this abstract level that it is independent from the organization ultimately. Again, so because you want to use this process, as you said, with the merger, you have two different organizational structures, but they also have, let's say, 90% the same processes. But you have to have the inventory so they can even talk to each other, where one calls it like this, one calls it like that, but ultimately they do the same thing. So a lot of people talk about the same process, but they say, because they call it differently. Sometimes they call it the same, but they're doing different things. And to clarify this is what the inventory is for. And that is deriving it top down is super. Principally, you have to go through the levels of your organization to get there. Ultimately, though, I do believe the inventory should be defined in a more generic, organizational, independent way to give you the degrees of freedom to say in future, this process will be outsourced, so the purchasing will be centralized, or so all your have 20 sales sites, and they're all doing finance, controlling, accounts payables or something, and they said we want to centralize that. So it's completely decoupled from the organization. You are using the inventory to say you are all doing the same. Before you said you called it 10 different names, but it's actually always the same. Yeah, we agree here. And this will now be centralized. So it will be, say, taken out of your current organization and your responsibility, and we will be defining this as a central service in the headquarters or whatever. And we need to then change the organization. So the organizational setup and the say the processual like setup, you want to have the inventory in a form that you can use it for your transformation. Yeah. And the more it's like linked on, the people say, that's my process. It's no, it's not your process. It is the accounts payable process. Yeah. And that's where a lot of the times we have ownership. You have to differentiate between the operational ownership. So this is, I'm responsible for sales in Americas. Yeah. But the way of standardizing and this, owning the process from a process management perspective, that can be decoupled. And that sometimes a challenge as well, getting this set of ownership straight on the more management of the process and the design and taking it to process excellence versus the people that have to are responsible and own it from an operational perspective.
Well, I think that's the TIE capability model gives you that abstract view, so you can look across. And when I create a process inventory, I use the names that the business calls it. So if one business calls it account opening, that's what I call it. If another one says onboard client, that's what we call it, because ultimately they have to take ownership from an organization for their processes. The one area where I disagree, though, is you still need to maintain that organizational structure. And let me just bring up one use case: risk management. So I spent pretty much my entire career in financial services, which is one of the most heavily regulated industries. And if you follow financial service news, there's fine. I just saw an article someone highlighted to me. TD Bank in North America just set aside $2.9 billion for a potential regulatory fine that they see coming up. And that is just one instance. There's tons of them. Now, what is the core problem with risk management in financial services? And I spent a lot of time on this topic. It's ultimately you have a GRC platform, and a GRC platform is your risk repository. And if you get down to it, it's a data model of what are my processes, what are the risks on my processes, what are the controls on those processes, and then what's the monitors on the controls. Now, the challenge is a lot of companies use a very generic process taxonomy, like an APQC process classification framework. Now, the problem is when teams on the ground are doing risk assessments, you're looking at this generic taxonomy and you're in the mortgage business. You're like, that doesn't look like my business. So I'm going to do some interpretations. This kind of looks like this. So this kind of looks like that. So this is where I'm going to store my data. Well, that looks different than the retail business and looks different from credit card, et cetera, et cetera. So that leads to very poor risk data. And that data is now being rolled up for senior leadership to make decisions. A lot of boards have to have a risk management component, et cetera. But it also leads to confusion in the three lines of defense. Who's responsible for understanding what risks are in the environment, how you prioritize controls, et cetera, et cetera? The answer to that, and I could talk about DORA, which is a EU regulation that financial services have to be compliant by 2025. What is the key challenge with DORA and with this is you need to understand all the nuances of your business. You need to understand where in DORA, where your information communication and technology assets live. You need to understand where you intersect with third-party vendors and what they're doing. You need to give a lens to the business so that they could say, what are my critical business processes that in the event of an adverse event, such as a hurricane, disaster, political strife, whatever it may be, that they've defined what are the processes that have to maintain minimum level of operations. Now you give that to the technology teams. Now they know all the specific nuances of how technology is built to support those processes. So they could say, oh, we don't have enough redundancy built in, or we don't have the right failover, or whatever it may be. You need that specific process understanding and the understanding of, and this there's going to be inefficiencies and overlaps and dead bodies all over the place. You need to be educated on all that so that you could drive risk management successfully.
And I think it's like a dimension within the process. So you need to have on a certain level, you are generic with the process inventory, and then you go down to okay, where does this process occur? And we have this also in the IT implementations you're going through. It says, well, it's ultimately the same process, but they do their warehousing with an automated warehousing system. They do it, a lot more manually. Yep. But ultimately, the key, let's say, even also risks or the necessities concerning, let's say, the booking of the inventory is the same. It is the same process, but it is implemented differently. And the occurrence of certain variants of processes you need to track. You have to have this documented. So here with the risks, I think it's very similar. You need to, so you can have an abstract process or risk model. At some time, you need to say, where does this occur? And this explicit, let's say, occurrence of a risk needs to be owned. Independent from that, there is like a risk hierarchy that needs to be owned. And I think you have this with, and this is where things get really, but I'm not saying complex, but this is where the governance comes into the plane, where you really have to, and getting that set up. I think it's just as important for the digital transformation in the context of an IT implementation, as well as for all the compliance use cases. It always comes down to ultimately you do have a placeholder, I call it in the inventory, to say this is something we need to talk about in the dimension of risk or in the dimension of IT or any like metric like a KPI, but you need to have that operational level underneath it. So if you consolidate your KPIs, you're not comparing apples and pears, but you have a clear like input output defined on what the goal of this scenario or process is, and you can nail down and say, look, in this occurrence, you're not performing, and these guys are performing, and I think that's something where I don't think you should get it too mixed up, because I think fundamentally what you are talking in the book, just disagree if it's not right, is that the framework has to be in place. Before you can get down and manage these things good or better, and to manage the chaos, as you said, get the chaos into the control, you have to have this overlaying and this alignment on the framework, on the inventory, and then you can dig into all these different dimensions and details that are associated around it.
But that would mean then, just to butt in for a second, that would mean then, and I see this happening in my interaction with clients as well, is that when you set up a process architecture or a process hierarchy, first and foremost, it needs to align. If there's already a capability model, it needs to align with that. And secondly, you need to start somewhere. So very often APQC or some other framework is used at least to get it started. But I always recommend them, and I think that's in line, Michael, what you're saying as well. You need to align that with the jargon that you're using in the organization. It doesn't mean much if you just keep the standard names if the people don't recognize it. That's just productivity. I think where the rubber meets the road is where you say, listen, to what level of granularity do I need to go in my process hierarchy so that I can still have a simple enough understandable framework, but that I still at the same moment and on the other side can link to frameworks that are, for instance, used in risk management, because they typically operate those risks and connect those risks on a much more granular level than just your simple process hierarchy level 1 and level 2. If you manage to accomplish that, then you get that alignment between risk management and process management, and between IT management and process management, which is incredibly valuable.
It becomes your common language for everything. I just want to make one distinction too. The alignment to capability model too. So this, I'm going to say a controversial statement. I'm sure,
Ooh, we love those. But let's hear it.
I view a capability model and APQC as functionally the same. So they're just standard models that are abstract, and I think
I tend to agree, but we're stepping. We
were just talking to Roland about this yesterday, and we all agree. That's exactly what we say. I think we agree. Oh, Caspar.
No, totally. I was just wondering, and I'm pounding over this for a long time. How do we get this between the ears of the enterprise architects? Because they don't seem to understand yet. At least exceptions are there.
And I've had some debates with people on LinkedIn and stuff like that, but I
Yeah,
don't
I
get
know.
it
I saw that.
because I think people key on, well, capability and process are different words. Well, really, what's important is they're both organizationally agnostic and they're both abstract concepts. So it is either one could work as your thesaurus. Whereas your process inventory is very much org aligned. And I think that organostic and org aligned, having both of those views are important. Caspar, to your point about levels of depth. So, and it goes to the structure of my book. So, my book is in three parts. So, the first part is just the case of why process inventory is important. I talked about the framework. I describe all its various components in good level of detail, and then the context of what it means in a transformation. Part two is all about the use cases. Okay, so now you've documented this process hierarchy, you've documented all this information. What are you going to do with it? Is it, it's not for just posterity's sake alone. And then the third part is chapters 8, 9, and 10 are all about the process center of excellence. And I just want to bring that up into your third point. And what I do with clients a lot is I help them set up a process center of excellence. But it always starts with a strategy. Why are you doing this? What value proposition are you bringing to the organization? And what use cases do you want to implement it for? And that's going to dictate your level of depth. And if risk is a big use case, then you go to the level of depth that you need to for risk. I was in one, this is a long time ago, but I went to one financial services client, and their issue was they felt like they had an operational resiliency risk because a lot of their core heavy transaction platforms were COBOL running on the mainframe, and they felt like they had key person risk. So we went not only to the process level, but we mapped the process. And if you go to an activity in a process, you get to a point where you're all technology. So now you kind of integrate, here's my BPMN process model, but then here's my system interaction diagram where my swim lanes aren't people, my swim lanes are technology. And now I can map every technology and I can map the business rules within it, et cetera, et cetera. You're not going to do that in all cases, but in their specific case, that was important to them.
And that's the flexibility I really think you need to bring in, because the inventory up the top it's, let's say, stable. And then you're digging down into the use cases. And I think the art of doing it properly is to build up an inventory that then can serve at the right time the different various use cases. And the ultimate goal is then that sometime you've done the risk management use case, then you've done the IT management use case. And because you haven't built the bridges like that, you can get these people to get together, because the risk guys say, we need some IT support in mitigating these risks. Let's talk about implementing some 4I principle in the system. And wow, you have your risk and controls there, and you have your IT functionalities there. And you say, or applications. They say, let's talk how we help each other here. And then everybody's happy. But the path there is a way. And so maybe one question around, especially as you write down in your book, say what is important about the inventory to be comprehensive, and the quality is super important. So a lot of pushback we get in projects is, but that's so much effort. So they see, if I had it, then that would be great. But hell, doing interviews with the whole organization and then building up the inventory. And so how do you actually answer this question from how do you go about this, even on a pragmatical sense of getting an inventory together where the balance between is arguable in an organization that is just under time pressure? They forgot to do it last year, so you have to get it done by next week. What's the answer there on investing this time?
So I think it's very simple, and I think I laid it out in chapter 1, but you will.
Let me read.
No,
sorry for that.
Michael.
Russell, you don't have it memorized? Oh God, I'm
so. Yeah, he does have the book.
I think it's a simple proposition. You will pay for your chaos. So you have a choice, and not making a choice is a choice. But you will pay if you do not do this. You'll pay for this in high defects, customer satisfaction issues, a lot of money spent on transformation programs, because you always have to do a lot of current state assessment to understand what your environment even does. Like, you will pay for this. You'll pay for in a lot of ways. You could pay upfront and get your process information organized, or you could pay in the back end. Either way, I think it's a case for, when it's as ubiquitous in the industry, but 70% of transformations fail. And the global spend for transformation programs is $3.4 billion. And there's only 5 countries in the world that have a GDP above that. So just to put a context, like that represents a massive amount of financial loss. It represents customers that are maybe leaving your organization because they're not getting the experience they want. It's stakeholders that are frustrated that you're not moving fast enough in this organization. There's a lot of cost to that. So to me, the case is very simple. This is not to create an inventory. So let's keep BPMN 2.0 kind of models out, but just to create the inventory is actually a very lightweight exercise. And I think in a lot of cases, having the process names in risk management is a good one because this is now the core of your GRC data model. Having the process names is so important because I could do mapping to it. And then when I want to go down to the detailed level of how each process works.
And that's a lot of where the confusion comes in. People, when you talked about process management, they always think about BPMN level 16 like detail. But that comes afterwards. So the inventory is exactly the overarching, as you say, process names, the list, dictionary. And from there, depending on the use case, people are willing to invest in the details. And I think that's where there's always a lot of confusion. And talking about because you say you help customers building up center of excellence as a core from which then this can be, be brought or driven into the organization. You also said at the beginning, foundation for success, low investment in capability building, that is one of the key errors that is done. And I really like that as well, because what I think you're talking about the losses that the companies have for the let's say the consulting companies, a lot of the time, that's their business model. They don't want the project to go through seamlessly and efficiently. They want to open up their bag and say, change request, or this chaos is the best thing that can happen to us. It's like, some people, profit from chaos and war. And I know this going to be a pushback at most probably when this is published. But ultimately, I also believe that the capability within the organization to manage the chaos and align internally on that's what you're building up, this capability with the inventory and the center of excellence for people to drive this. And this is something that I think is also well invested. That's where people say you can't outsource that. You can't just say, let's give it all to some consulting company to sort us out and to transform us. That's contradictory. If you as an organization want to change, you can't outsource that. It says, please change for us or change us. How does that work? You have to build up that capability within. And I think that is something like a red line through your book as well. If you're talking about personas, addressing business people to say, look, this is a guideline on success stories with the use cases you have, and also some fundamentals on getting there.
The interesting thing is that BPM projects are started sometimes for all the wrong reasons. I mean, it's good that they start a project, but very often when I ask them, why are you doing this? Because I agree, Michael, it's one of the first questions I ask as well in a workshop is, why are you doing BPM? Yeah, because our ERP vendor says it's needed. Well, yeah, he's typically partially right, but probably for the wrong reasons. It's more for their commercial gain than for anything else.
Exactly.
But ultimately, if you put everything together, I mean, that process inventory, and I typically call that part of that is the structure is the process hierarchy.
Yeah.
And you need to come to a minimum viable collection of processes without redundancy. I mean, that's your wet dream for BPM. So I have this set that describes my entire organization, my entire operation, and there is not a single redundancy in there. I mean, that's what you strive for, including the links to your applications, your risks, your roles, your regulation management. I mean, when you talk about DORA, I mean, there's nothing more excellent for an organization to say, listen, I can document my regulation. I can translate it into a business requirement. I can connect that to a process. And if I'm really advanced, I might even mine some of these processes. So when an auditor comes in and says, we're going to be auditing you on ISO 22301, business continuity management, chapter 5, then you simply find that in your repository. And then by 2 clicks, you know exactly which processes are in scope of your audit. Exactly. I mean, even that is a big win, because I remember the times where I had to run all around the organization just to figure out what is in scope for our upcoming audit. I mean, that was like a day job.
Yeah, exactly. So, and one thing I want to touch on, which we didn't touch on, but I think this is critical. So your process inventory, your process hierarchy, process architecture, whatever we want to call it, is your common language. So it helps you define scope. It helps you get your business and IT people together, all that good stuff. But there's another aspect of it, which I do want to talk about because I think it's important, is that inventory now becomes a anchor point for all organizational knowledge. There's a lot of operational data or data about how you run your business, like application repositories, risk repositories, vendor catalogs, et cetera, et cetera. That's in your environment, that these are siloed right now and that there's nothing that ties them together. But if you could take that data and you could co-locate it in your process management tool, now I could start doing associations. Now I'm creating one kind of repository of all operational information that I could slice and dice the environment in any way I want and understand the impacts of any change.
Yeah.
So it becomes like extremely powerful and something that if you did not have this, you would spend 6-9 months, whatever the size of your project, doing some investigation of what the current state is. Which why spend all that? Kind of do it up front so that you have it in a kind of perpetual manner.
So that means that the connectedness of your organization, your enterprise documentation content is the ultimate benefit of BPM. And also, I would say, as the French say, the raison d'être, so the reason for existence of why we have BPM. And if you do it for any other use case, it might still work, but it probably won't scale.
And especially with all these demand on agility and say moving business. I mean, if you don't have all this tied together, there will always be certain parts that, the risks change because you have some new compliance rules. If you don't have that somehow tied up to the processes, then even your SOPs in your organization, how can you really assure that within, let's say, half a year, your organization knows that due to a change in some compliance rule, you have to act differently. And so managing agility also, it's not just about having like this static state, but managing the dynamics that I think businesses now want to have. Yeah,
absolutely.
And this ever learning like systematic in place that never standing still, striving for excellence, but always adapting to new competitive situations, growing with your business. All these, let's say, buzzwords out there. How do you really manage we're not talking about a small, 5-man kind of organization. We're talking about something global. How else would you manage that if you don't have really this all tied together, that you can trigger something here and know, like if I change that, what response do I need on the other side to get the organization to adapt in an adequate time? And that's absolutely, Michael. That's one of the big topics I see around bringing this integrated management system, or enterprise management system. I think, Caspar, that's how we called it. And you dropped one word, which I think we also just have to have a quick dig into as well. You said tool. Yeah.
Oh.
So in your book, you were very bold, I must say, Michael. Super. I mean, really, I would, if I ever wrote a book, I'd write about I would even write about cooking recipes, but touching the tool topic, wow, that's bold, And I tell you why, because
I made no recommendations. I just listed.
Oh no, yeah, but that's more than you didn't recommend all. You didn't list all, so you're gonna get some feedback on that, I bet you.
Sure, yeah. I know I missed some.
And what we did once, partly, Jochen, he did I would say he wasn't a comprehensive tool, but he took different tools that are obvious in the German market. Not all of them, of course, but he said, and it was more driven by the point, if you're doing a tool selection, really look at your use case. Don't try to get the all capabilities that there are possible, like say, because your maturity is 0. You want to do use case, let's say SAP, then why look at tools that have whatever, on big capabilities and no code, low code modeling and all this. So be use case specific and drill your requirements down on that. And he did an example with, 3 different use cases, more compliance related risk management, more
Yeah.
SAP IT driven, and then just showed that there were nuances in the evaluation that made sense to say, okay, for these cases, you have a clearer view on what you really want to maybe select as a tool.
Yeah, but
and
just,
the
Russell,
shitstorm, the point was the shitstorm was unbelievable. That was the post that it was just every tool provider, everybody that, it's like dissing your son. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so, somebody says something bad about your son. Anything we said there, it was a shitstorm. We go, God, we're never going to talk about tools again. So, Michael?
Yeah, so Russell's very passionate about this.
I love it.
But
yes.
just let's separate the boys from the men then, real quick, without naming names, by the way. But no, if I'm logically think about this, and I take the statements that Michael made about it's very important to have that connectedness between roles, activities, tools, risks, well, you name it, all of the enterprise artifacts. I mean, that's the fundament of BPM.
Yeah.
Then you would do yourself quite a disservice if you choose a BPM platform that is not object-centric.
Oh, for sure.
Otherwise, there's no way of why are you then documenting? You're just creating glorified pictures.
Yes.
And that is something that a lot of organizations still haven't figured out yet. And that's what we try to help them with sometimes.
Yeah, like let's take a simple use case. I want to retire platform X. So now I want to understand what are all the processes that are on it, who are all the users. I need to understand everything about it so that I'm comprehensive in the project to get rid of it, to retire it. And that's object-oriented is absolutely important. I want to touch on one thing, and Russell, you talked about integrated management system, and I love this topic, and I think it's the future. But digital twins. So
there we go. Yeah.
So I'm excited.
I love that term as well. I really like that.
Yeah. So digital twin it's a virtual replica of the real world environment. So you need to build a model of how your organization works, how everything comes together, and what you're doing is I think AI. A lot of use cases now, it's on the periphery. I could give it text and it could help me write an email. I could even give it a contract and it'll tell me if the terms are favorable to me or not. But I think where it really becomes powerful when you educate AI on all the nuances of your business, where the inefficiencies, redundancies, where are the dead bodies? And if you could build that model and back it with an AI engine and you start feeding it data about how your environment processes through process mining or data feeds or whatever, but your process names become the consistent data label that the AI engine can look at. Now
that's a good point. Just to dig in there, because what we start off with the process inventory, but ultimately, and that's where Caspar, I completely agree. You have to think about the enterprise objects we're talking about. Yeah. So then we are talking about operating models. We're talking about the entities within your organization, your whole risk hierarchy and the controls. So there's so many different artifacts or objects that you need to connect and bring together. And you're right, Michael. So in the middle, we have the process where we say this is the core where everything connects. But from let's say the word from the tool perspective, or from managing this in a way that really will bring success to a company, it's much more than just a process management tool, or as you say, a process making picture tool. So and that's where I think even, but there's no term really out there. So there is like this. I think the necessity more and more is to have like this comprehensive tool to manage the digital twin, the enterprise digital twin with all its artifacts, and to take this from a current stage in like a governance and with a center of excellence to have this like evolving near time to the organization evolving. And that's what I think is really the key demand that I think a lot of customers they do realize, but they're not so aligned that they really get their act together to
I think we're on this up. I think we're on the cusp of a paradigm shift. I think most people have thought about BPM as I need to optimize my processes. I need to eliminate redundancy, et cetera. And now this becomes a platform for all organizational knowledge, for connecting the dots, for getting to a single common language, for connecting diverse resources and removing silos and being clear on things like scope, et cetera, et cetera.
Amen to that. Two little things. So first one. we record this now on this day, and next week is the BPM 2024 conference in Krakow, Poland. So it's the academic BPM conference. I'm happy to be there, but I'm going to ask those questions. I'm going to ask, well, how do you see the future of BPM? Because to my experience, BPM in the academic world is very much about the technicalities of process mapping and process optimization. But it hardly ever gets out of the sphere of the process. It doesn't go into the adjacent fields like risk management and IT management. Now, the second thing is, and Russell always knows I need to keep this role, we're running out of time because we approaching already the hour, and we need to keep it. Well, we can talk to Michael for hours. That is for sure.
Well, I mean, for all the questions and all the details, that's what the book is there for.
Yeah, that's what the book is.
When we have other interviewees and everything is just in their head, but you've managed to bring it all into the book. So I think, and as I said, I really do think for the persona that you were mentioning, it really is a good, solid, book. Especially with the use cases and the aspects, it's always. So I was going through it. I said, that's something. Sometimes you go into a focus, go down your rabbit hole, but sometimes you need to come back and say, what's the big picture? What are the other aspects that you also have to take along again?
Exactly.
Get inspired by some use cases. So for all these aspects, I really think it's a real recommendation to have, let's say, under your pillow before you go to your next big SAP meeting where the CEO says, deliver. According to Michael Schank, well, we have to do some interviews
exactly.
first, so blame it on Michael Schank. That's what you're going to do.
I love it.
Michael, any last words that you want to contribute to this particular interesting episode?
I'll just give a plug. So first off, excellent conversation. I could talk to you guys for 3 more hours. I think I really enjoyed being, and I'm honored to be your first guest. But I guess I'll give a plug. So if people want to find me, I'm active on LinkedIn. So just connect with me, ask me questions, look at my post. My book is on Amazon. So if you want to find it, it's, as you mentioned, Digital Transformation Success. And then if people are curious about my business, it's processinventory.com. And I detail out some of my consulting services. And I just signed a contract to develop a 3-day training class. So that will be coming out in the next month or so.
Oh, cool. We'll put those links in the show notes as well, Michael. It has been an absolute pleasure. So thank you again for being our first guest in season 2 and our first ever interview. And good luck.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Caspar. Thanks, Russell.
All
right. Have a great day, guys.